Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Veg Networking Canada, where vegan plant-based companies connect and collaborate. We acknowledge, honor, and respect that many of us are located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of many Indigenous peoples of Canada. Today, we have a special guest with us, an award-winning social entrepreneur on a mission to empower Indigenous youth, all while championing strength by dismantling generational trauma. Veg Networking Canada is pleased to introduce the founder and CEO of Cheekbone Beauty. Welcome, Jenn Harper.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to speak with you today.
Well, we are thrilled to hear more about you, your story, and your business. So, speaking of Cheekbone Beauty, can you tell us what led you to start a vegan plant-based company?
Well, I think when I look at why we chose that path, it was really it's what the market is asking for and seeking. I think in the beauty space, there was these trends for so long for maybe clean beauty and different kinds of beauty, but over the last 5 years, and when we started this, we were noticing there's a huge shift in a search for vegan goods of any kind, and beauty definitely fell into that category. And then, of course, I mean, if we look to nature, like there is just so many incredible active ingredients that come from plants. It just makes sense that these are going in products that are going to be on our skin.
And on that note too, was there any thought originally about the testing side of it all, like the animal testing side or anything to do with beauty? Because that's a very like hot button issue.
Yeah, and I think really confusing for most people because there is a confusion between cruelty free and vegan, and they're two totally different things. And one of the things that I learned really early on was this idea of cruelty free is kind of um, in many cases, we know this still happens in pharma, but in beauty, a lot of the ingredients that exist have existed since like the 1930s to the 1950s. They have been tested. So there's no need for these ingredients to continually be tested. And so they've been proven safe, and there is no animal testing that happens for so many of them. There are maybe sort of outliers in that area, but in the research and talking with some scientists and people in the beauty space, it was kind of like a made up thing. And what I've learned about our industry and I guess marketing tactics, if you will, is the concept of fear mongering is a way to sell. And so if you could put cruelty free, because of course we're going to scare the crap out of people and make them assume something really bad's happening by putting those sort of one line blanket statements. It's happened within our space and in all kinds of things. The whole no parabens, no phthalate, like these ideas when people, when consumers who don't come from a science background actually don't even understand what a paraben is and that they're actually not all bad. They've been proven safe in many cases, and some, not all of them. I'm not, but the whole industry is very nuanced. It's not black and white, and that played a role in even cruelty free. And that positioning that a lot of brands took, and it's something that they could use to market their products, even though I can guarantee you most people have no idea or have done a deep enough dive to actually understand what that means. And then being vegan is completely separate or plant-based from that cruelty-free category.
So, in terms of your entrepreneurial origin story, did it start with Cheekbone Beauty, or are you a serial entrepreneur? Was there something before? Are you running multiple businesses right now? Like, what was the start of it all?
Yeah, none of the above. I probably have no business being in the beauty industry. I was selling seafood at the time. I had spent actually most of my career in the food space. The only thing I think that relates is one, it's a product and I have to sell it. So I kind of had that skill. But I was always obsessed with the idea of sustainability. So for 8 years, I was in the seafood world. And whenever I'd be at a trade show, or if you knew I was talking to chefs or clients, my whole conversation surrounded let's tell better stories on your menus, like, and change the world basically at the same time. Like we could make different choices, and how aquaculture, no, it's not the best when it's done in sea. Maybe there's land based, like, and that's just fish farming, right? That's what aquaculture means. But really trying to help them find and figure out where their seafood was coming from, and could they then extend that to their client and say, yeah, this was caught or made here by this fisherman or fishmonger. So I've always been in that space. And then prior to that, I worked for Cisco, which is just broadline food distribution. I actually had a pop out of bed middle of the night dream back in 2015 with three native little girls covered in lip gloss, and then had the audacity to believe, or I call it delusion now, to believe that I could start a cosmetics company. And what's really interesting about my story is no one around me at the time was saying that this was not a great idea, and maybe I didn't know enough about this category or this space or anything even actually to start a business. And my story has to go back even a little bit further, because what is really important, I think, to my journey as an entrepreneur was I was on this like personal journey. So I was actually newly sober in November 26, 2014. I get sober. I have this dream 2 months later. And I look back now and I recognize, well, maybe that's why my family and friends weren't saying this is a bad idea, because they're like, oh, she's not drinking and she's spending all her time working on this company she thinks she's going to make. But maybe that was all a good thing. And at the same time, if we look at the history of what was happening in Canada in particular, that 2015 was the final report for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so I, at 38, along with the rest of the country, was learning what happened in residential school, and both of my grandparents survived that. And so not only does my addiction to alcohol become part of this story, but also learned this term called generational or transgenerational trauma, when a group of people or individuals are faced with an event that they're not equipped to deal with. And in my case, it was my grandparents surviving residential school, and how that was passed on to my dad, my aunties, my uncles, and then ultimately passed on to me and my siblings. And that these problems, unfortunately, still negatively impact First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people to this day. And after that dream, I was like, well, okay, I don't know anything about that. I'm not an activist, but what if I could start a business? And from that dream, I wrote on my, got up and wrote on my laptop that night, was like, okay, create a lip gloss, but use a portion of the profits to do something to support my community. And I really, at that time, had no idea what that looked like. Fast forward to where we are today, we launched a scholarship program. We've donated like over $300,000 to many organizations that support Indigenous youth. And I was a huge fan in those early days, and still am, of like brands like Patagonia, where it's like they were putting like people and planet before profits. And then the model of like Tom's shoes, where it was like this one for one. And I was like, there could be business that's really about doing good in the world, and we're not just like worrying about filling stakeholders' pockets all the time. Like, and then getting into the beauty space and recognizing, coming from the food industry where the margins are not like what they are in beauty, I was like, of course this is a great industry where you have room, margin to play with, so that you could become really a charitable organization at the same time as operating a business. I hope
Wow.
that wasn't too
Okay.
long.
No, no, too long or too short doesn't exist with us here. Whatever it is, it is. And so, you gave everybody listening some insight into your business and into Cheekbone Beauty. So the next question for you is, where is your brand going in the future?
Where is Cheekbone going in the future? Well, I hope we're constantly growing. I, like many entrepreneurs, have made so many mistakes on this path and spent money in places I shouldn't. So I feel like we're finally in a year, which is year, when did I go in this full time? In 2019. And that's when we got investment. And so now, recognizing you got investment, I owe them that money back at some point. And so the business has to scale and grow. And in the early days, I would make really bold statements like, I want this to be valued at $1 billion. And it's crazy to say that, but I really envisioned this being a global brand. Like, that was the purpose. I wasn't starting this to be like, let's just be this, like, to play small, if you will. I really thought that a brand that was on shelves around the world, that was born from an Indigenous person, represented Indigenous people, existed to support Indigenous people, was really worthy of being there. And I still believe that. I now recognize, though, maybe it's going to take much more time than I highly anticipated. Those unicorn brands that are valued at those billion-dollar valuations all have a backstory that took longer, and there are some instances where, like the Glossiers of the world, that is a unicorn. That's very rare. That doesn't happen that quickly for so many of us. And what was really interesting in the year that I made that really bold statement was there was a lot of brands founded by women that did reach that capacity, and I really thought, oh wow, if they could do it, that was empowering me to think that would be possible for us too. And I still believe it is. I just know the path looks a little bit different. I recognize now we really want to work on becoming a healthy, profitable business so that we can survive, versus just driving growth with marketing dollars, which we all know those are high risk moves in so many cases.
Absolutely. So in the beauty space that you're in, what are some transformations or trends?
Definitely, I think the consumer is so well educated in a way, because I'll say that with sometimes we think we learn from finding things on the internet, and however, there could be cases where that's a lot of misinformation. So we have an audience that wants to become well informed. And so I really think the consumer, and I don't see this as a trend, is really seeking knowledge about the products they use, where they come from, and who and what is being impacted by that. And when you choose a path of plant-based, you're really thinking heavily on what does that actually mean for our planet, because we also want to be really cognizant of the fact that we can't just extract all of these beautiful plant ingredients without this idea of how a regenerative process is going to look like. And what happens with human beings is sometimes we're so short-sighted because we're not thinking of the long term. So what we did at our company is we actually built our entire business based on what we call our 7 grandfather teachings. And this comes from my Anishinaabe or Ojibwe culture. And one of the teachings that is really common in our communities is this 7 generations teaching. So thinking about what we do today and how will that actually impact not just our next generation, but the next 7, so that we can think about where and how we're sourcing. Are the partners we work with paying their people a fair wage? Are these ethical practices in terms of like palm oil is huge ingredient in our space, especially in the plant-based area. Are we working with responsibly sourced palm oil? And those are decisions we make, and an investigation we have to actually do and take to ensure that, because one thing I have learned is people lie really easily from around the world. And so there's a lot of back end investigation that really happens before we buy palm oil from anyone, or mica, or whatever ingredient, what have you. But it's really, really important to know and all the ingredients you're using and where they're coming from. And I think that is a trend that's not going to go away. And I think the consumer is just getting more and more educated. And I think in the beauty space, people want to know what they're using and where it comes from. And I hope that we're doing the work at Cheekbone Beauty to help them with that.
Well, thank you for essentially outlining why we frame that question more so as like a transformation than a trend. Because a trend, yeah, a trend is great and is cool, but like the seeing positive transformations is what we're all about. And so you outlining that was great. Now, at the beginning or earlier on, at least you had mentioned, I think you said $300,000 to different organizations. This is the part of the conversation that you can dive into more detail about organizations that you've given to in the past, that you're giving to now, that you plan to, because the question is centered around giving back in charity. Like, what does that mean to Jen? What does that mean to Cheekbone Beauty?
Yeah, so a lot of times people say, did that come after that? This giving back has always been at the root of who we are. Also, an indigenous way of thinking, or a worldview, we like to call it, is this idea that you're not successful unless you're giving back to community. So the idea of just attaining wealth for yourself is not a version of success within our communities. And so our brand has always been about this giving back piece. We've partnered with Inspire for our scholarship fund. So they're one of the organizations that we work with. And there's too many to list in terms of youth organizations, women's organizations, like whether it's shelters or supports for women and family that people reach out and we are supporting them and sending product. And that has happened on such a large scale that there's just far too many to list. In the early days, we were specifically working with the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society, which now too, if people ask if we want a donation, we say if you can make it either to Inspire in honor of the Cheekbone Scholarship Fund, or if you'd like to make it to the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society. Those are the two that we always recommend on a higher level, because one, there's sort of a few components to the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society, but education was one, which is absolutely what we're pushing for, having proper education for Indigenous youth within our spaces. And then secondly was the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society focuses on the health and welfare of Indigenous kids. So whether that's health or childcare, in terms of children being extracted from their communities or homes, and how do we make sure that that doesn't happen and they get to stay with family or community when there's issues within the family unit. And so we really believe in that organization led by Cindy Blackstock. We've always been inspired and empowered by all of the effort she's put into that. And then what Inspire has done is just created this large philanthropic give back with the whole purpose of getting Indigenous youth more and more educated, which is amazing. And I think they've been in existence, I believe, for 30 years. And we were just discussing some data this morning, and I'm going to mess it all up, but so many years ago, there was like less than this percentage of, Indigenous folks getting educated. The numbers have like dramatically changed. And I think it's if you think in relation to what Inspire has done over the last 30 years, I definitely think they're a part of that, seeing that change. And I can't recognize how many times I meet another Indigenous person and they're like, yeah, I have my PhD and my master. I was like, they're just so educated. It's insane. So I love hearing that, but there's still so much work to do. I feel like from whether it's our urban Indigenous people or on reservation Indigenous people, we, in particular on reservation, the public or the elementary school level system to the high school level system is not anywhere near our off reservation systems, and that really just seems unfair. And I think it's the early years. I really believe that's where you foster this love for learning. And so that's why the First Nation Child and Family Caring Society is so important, because they're really working hard to change what school looks like on reservation.
Well, it's very clear that that organization and a few others that you mentioned are sources of inspiration for you. And we'll talk about inspiration a little bit more after this next question. So not to confuse this question with one about inspiration, but the next question for you is, what are some books, podcasts, apps, or other resources that you would recommend to business owners, entrepreneurs, whether that's for anything, leadership, mindset, finance, anything like that, books, podcasts, apps, or other resources?
Yeah, I think I weekly listen to How I Built This with Guy Raz. I feel like there's just a lot of, I love the way he's able to tell a story through the entrepreneur. And that's one of my favorites. And he gets to speak to some really incredible businesses that are like really household names. And so I think it's interesting to hear those journeys. I am a huge reader and I have so many books that I've read. So it's hard to have a favorite. I do suggest, this is such an old book, but for 10 years, I literally read this book every year for 10 years. And it was the Seven Habits book. I'll always screw it up if I try to say the whole thing. But the principles, it's just really about principles and how you operate as a human, but how, in effect, that can ultimately change your professional life, your personal life, so many things. So I just love that book, and it's so useful in business as well as in family. And right now I'm reading, what is it? It's another Adam Grant book, and I'm in the middle of it, and Hidden Potential, and it's been amazing so far. And I'm also in the middle of unreasonable hospitality, which is excellent. Like
All
it's
right.
very simple read, but it's all about the my actual former career, which was the food space, and how, those moments of when I think of customer service at Cheekbone Beauty, we work really hard to make it the absolute best, because in many ways we're never going to beat these big companies, but we can beat them when it comes to customer service, and I know we can, because we have real humans, and we're such a small organization that we can be really agile in that way. And so we work really hard on having really incredible customer service.
Amazing, amazing. So you mentioned customer service, you mentioned your team. Clearly, those folks on your team are sources of inspiration for you. We've had guests answer this question talking about other individuals, other organizations, even themselves and what they've gone through and overcome as sources of inspiration. And then we've had other guests talk about, from a more philosophical lens, what does inspiration actually mean to them? But that is the next question for you is, what does inspiration mean when I say that? What does it mean to Jenn? What does it mean to Cheekbone?
Yeah, I think it can mean so many things. I'll be honest, I am inspired by tons of stuff. Whether it's my like walk in the morning in nature, and I'm just like recognizing the simplicity of like a bird eating its breakfast, and how that's it's just there and it's happening, and meaning, everything's all here for us, and that we don't really have to look too far to be supported. And of course, by so many people, I from the books I've read, like I'm inspired by the author of this book, um Unreasonable Hospitality, right now, how you read someone's journey and you're like, wow, 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 like all the things that happen to them to get to where they are. And and then I'm really blessed, because I certainly get tons of emails and direct messages from so many Indigenous young people, and ask for mentorship, and I do my best to spend time and help. And so having those conversations is really inspiring. And when we launched our scholarship fund, the first year I think we got 10 applicants, the year after maybe 100. This year we got 350 applicants. We were only able to give out 10. And I can tell you, reading through those and seeing the work that these young people are doing and want to do with their lives and careers is like literally awe inspiring. And we would love to give every single one of them a scholarship. And we had to only pick 10. And that was a huge challenge, just because not only myself, but our team was totally inspired by this group of young people and what they're working on, and the educational paths they're taking and the career journeys they want to take. It was just really, really moving to see and hear too. So many of them share their life, like what they've been through and what it's taken. Whether it's like being in a foster kid, and now like it was, yeah, many of us are in tears and emotionally moved by so many of them. And yet, despite all of those situations, I can assure you, and obviously I'm going to say, my bias, but Indigenous people are so stinking resilient. When you know what they've been through and can overcome, and yet are still not just surviving, now we're thriving in this world, and showing people our way of seeing and knowing and being, and how you can have a different viewpoint.
Love that. Love that. So before we get into the last question for you, little curveball, and maybe it's something as simple as it works and it sounded good, or maybe there's a deeper meaning. But we're always curious to know why a brand has the name that they have. So why Cheekbone Beauty?
Well, I was chuckling because was sitting around a boardroom with a bunch of other Native women this morning at the Globe and Mail Center, um, and I just saw all their cheekbones, and I said, "Can you believe people still ask me why I named the brand Cheekbone?" But there's a few more reasons. Not only are, a lot of Indigenous people known for these really high, prominent, wide cheekbones, that when I did the research on the word, I remember that morning or that evening coming home, because I listened to a podcast. Sarah Blakely was talking about how she named Spanx. And Cheekbone had already been in existence for like 9 months, but there was no name, right? It was kind of just still this thing with no name. And I was like, okay, what am I like gonna name it? And you're thinking about it all the time. And I was a sales rep, so I was doing a lot of driving and sitting in the car listening to many, many things. And she talked about how the K sound, people remember words with the K sound, and you can think of big brands that were once big brands: Kodak, Coca-Cola, Nike. Like the K and the K sound is in all of these words. And I was like, okay, I need to think of something with a K. And the word cheekbone popped into my head, and I was like, I absolutely love cheekbones on every human. It's one of my favorite features, but also Native people are known for these high prominent cheekbones. And then when I looked up the research that evening, it said high cheekbones, people are perceived as more trustworthy. And of course, being a new brand, so everything worked out. It had the K that and we have so many beautiful indigenous words, but I really did recognizing with my sales and marketing background, you need something that people are going to remember. And so our words are sometimes a bit challenging in our indigenous languages. It's not these aren't the easiest languages to learn for sure. So I was like, I'm going to use an English word that's hopefully memorable.
That's exactly why we were asking that question more, because that's such a cool story. So thanks for sharing. All right, Jen, last question for you. You can think of it as wisdom. We know some people don't like necessarily say that they're giving advice, but the question is, do you have any advice, wisdom, lessons for business owners or entrepreneurs?
I always give the same, and it's I have no special skills, honestly. Like it I look at this like if I can figure this out and do this, I really feel like anyone has the ability to do so. And I think for so long as a society, we've just believed certain things were meant for certain groups of people, but I believe this is all open to all of us. And the only thing I know that I've done is consistently for the last 7, 8 years, woke up every single day and did something to make Cheekbone Beauty more successful and worked on that. And so it's consistency is my answer.
Absolutely, absolutely. Time in the game versus trying to time the game, I guess you could kind of say. All right, Jen. So with that being said, is there anything that came up in today's conversation that you want to go back to? Anything that maybe we missed in today's conversation, or any announcements that you have for yourself or Cheekbone?
No, not at this moment. I think we've had a great conversation.
Okay, wonderful. Well, everybody, you can find out more online, cheekbonebeauty.com. It's exactly how there's no special spelling, cheekbonebeauty.com. And on Instagram, it's at cheekbonebeauty. This has been another amazing conversation with a great entrepreneur here at Veg Networking Canada. We're talking with the founder and CEO of Cheekbone Beauty, Jenn Harper. Jen, thank you for joining us. Everybody who's here with us live, thank you for joining us. And everybody who's going to be watching this and listening to this on your own time, thank you so much for joining us as well. We'll catch you soon on another episode of Veg Networking Canada. Take care. Bye for now.